startup founders have to understand is that it is a clash of perspectives. When you're in the corporate world, you're basically driven by a search for certainty, right? Everything is built around the concept of, let's cover every single angle. Let's make sure that all possible scenarios are analyzed to the nth degree, because the last thing we want to do is to make a mistake.
So how do you, as a B2B startup, create sustainable deal flow that converts? The answer comes from our guest today, Zoltan Vardy. He has created a program called The Launch Code, aimed at exactly this problem. We are extremely privileged to have him on the show today, and he's going to give his insights not only on that, but also on the different corporate cultures that exist between Europe and the United States, and what you as a startup should be thinking about before you make the jump to the States. Zoltan, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
It's fantastic to be here, Timo, and I look forward to a great conversation.
Me too. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. So you were about 20 years in the corporate world, and you're an exited founder yourself. That's quite a resume. Tell us maybe one or two things that you think startups should know about B2B sales and the corporate world that they usually don't know when they first start into this game.
Yeah, so as you referenced yourself, I've sort of lived on both sides of that divide. Spending 20 years in the corporate world and ascending to various more senior sales roles, ultimately being global head of sales for NBC Universal, based out of London, for the international TV networks, but also being a founder myself, kind of in the .com era, building up a business, selling it to strategic investors, and then investing in early stage businesses as an angel investor. And so I think I understand both of those perspectives. And I think that's actually one of the most important lessons that startup founders have to understand, is that it is a clash of perspectives. When you're in the corporate world, you're basically driven by a search for certainty. Right? Everything is built around the concept of, let's cover every single angle. Let's make sure that all possible scenarios are analyzed to the nth degree, because the last thing we want to do is to make a mistake. And so as a result, you operate in an environment of very careful and progress, heavy planning, lighter on execution. On the other side, startups are effectively motivated by the complete opposite, right? They're motivated by speed. It's get to the market quickly. It's close deals quickly and move forward as quickly as possible, because if we don't do it, then our competitors will. And so I think one of the things that you have to understand when you get into the process of enterprise sales is that you're going into an environment where the two parties are not aligned in their way of thinking about the world. Now, that in itself is a state of being, right? I like to say it's like gravity. I mean, you can be really angry about the fact that, a pen falls out of your hand on the floor, but it's just the way it is, right? That's how the world works. And so you kind of have to accept that as a part of the process. Once you accept that, though, there's a couple of things I think you have to keep in mind that I encourage startup founders to keep in mind. And the first one is, not all corporates are created equal. We think of this as kind of one massive organization of, multinational companies, but the fact is that there are different characteristics of different types of companies. And the positive and effective enterprise sales begins with choosing the right targets and defining certain characteristics that indicate that company is going to be more likely to be interested in what you're offering than someone else. And identifying those characteristics, digging into that is the first step, and then ultimately being successful at closing corporate deals.
Now, you mentioned they have different risk profiles. Startups, they can be more risky. They almost certainly are. Do you encourage them to take bigger risks when they're going after their first B2B targets? Do you tell them, like, sometimes you can shoot for the moon and, hey, maybe you'll get it? Or is it better to pull back a little bit on that risk and go after something that that you can get, that's realistic?
Yeah. I think that the founding principle of any strategy is a balance of risk, right? You can be, if you just think of it from an investment perspective, right? If you put all your money into Bitcoin, then you're a very high risk strategy. If you put all your money in, real estate, then you're being quite conservative in your thinking. It's kind of a balance of various elements. And that's what I encourage startup founders to think about. And to refer to my earlier point about finding the right corporates, there are basically, I think there are three types of customers that you can go after. I'll use this analogy of the rabbit, the deer, and the elephant, right? Elephants are the big multinational mammoth companies that move slowly, that make slow decisions. But if you actually can grab it, it's a big meal, right? It's a big win. On the other end are the rabbits, who are the smaller, nimble early stage businesses that are going to make quick decisions, but you can't really live on rabbits for the entire course of your business. And so where you have to fit the ideal customers is that deer category, right? Deer are generally the challengers in any vertical, right? So they're not the tier one companies, the big global names necessarily, but they're very strong, very robust companies with strong market positions, but they are fundamentally motivated more to work with other startups and to work with startups or try out innovative relationships because they have something to win, right? If they can catch an innovation, if they can catch a technology and integrate it, they're more likely to benefit, whereas elephants are very risk averse because they only can lose, right? And so one of the key factors is targeting deer more than elephants and rabbits, and then going through a whole range of qualifications that kind of give you that indication that these companies are a good partner for you. So one of those is generally I always encourage them to target privately held companies rather than publicly traded companies, for the simple fact that publicly traded companies are motivated very much by quarterly results, and so they're less likely to take chances on anything because they've got this pressure of performance. Companies that have a very clear decision-making process, either they're very centrally focused, in other words, all the decisions are made in the headquarters, or they have a very decentralized structure and all the decisions are made locally. But this kind of mix of, well, there's a decision here, there's a decision there, becomes an extremely difficult thing to manage. So having a clear decision-making tree is important. And finally, looking for companies that already through their other actions indicate that they have some interest in innovation. They have a corporate accelerator. They have a corporate VC arm. They have somebody called head of innovation or head of technology or something like that within their company. All of these are indications that these companies have already, from their mindset, established the fact that they want to do business with innovative companies. And those are the type of companies I think that startups really should target first when they start selling.
So I'm curious. I don't want to get too much into the details of this, but this detail I feel is actually kind of important because I don't have a good grip on it, is lead generation. How has that changed for startups, and how do you approach that with your startups when you're mentoring them? Because I imagine the process of finding your leads and then working those relationships to eventually convert them, that process has changed a lot with technology over the past 5 to 10 years.
It has changed, but I think the fundamentals remain the same, which is that ultimately people do business with people, and you have to be able to find the path towards getting in front of the right person with the right offer at the right time to make the decision. I'm not a big fan of kind of the two most sought after go-to approaches to lead generation. One is I call the I know a guy approach, right? Which is basically, I know a guy at company X, and we did business 10 years ago, and we'll probably do business now. Or my uncle knows a guy at company Y, and I'm sure he'll make an introduction, right? So that very, very network-based approach. It's fine to start, but it's not scalable. Then you've got the other approach, which is the spray and pray, right? That's when you send out 10,000 emails and hope somebody that responds. I don't think either is really the right way to go. I believe very much in being very, very honed in on who your ideal customer is, to the point where you understand their problems at a very, very granular level. You understand why what you're offering solves an important problem for them. And when you've created that ideal customer profile, then you start matching it up with companies that are more likely to be, matching that profile, then looking into the people that are at the companies and so on. And so that sort of structured approach is what I believe is going to drive long-term growth on the enterprise sales side, because at the end of the day, enterprise sales is not about, convincing 1,000 companies to do business with you. It's more about convincing 10, 15, 20 companies a year to buy high ticket, solutions from your business. So the more targeted you can be on who you reach out to, and the more your get into their comfort zone in terms of having an open conversation, the more likely it is you're going to close. So actually you might have fewer leads, but you'll have a higher close rate for the deals that you do. That's what I believe is going to be really a powerful tool. Having said that, obviously technology enables you to accelerate that process, to reach out, but I don't think it really replaces that fundamental, problem solution connection that you have to find.
I have to say, I have more than a few examples of startups I've come across which tried to make their living off the I know a guy solution.
It's very typical.
It's rampant.
Yeah, it's rampant. And I think it's all natural, right? That's your comfort zone. That's where you're going to find those initial conversations.
Sure.
And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that approach to start. But if you want to create a scalable business and predictable revenues, then you have to be able to move away from that. And that's what the launch code is all about, and what I basically do in my work with B2B tech founders.
Yeah. Let's talk about the launch code a little bit more. Now, without giving away too much of the secret sauce, how is it that you work with startups? So what does it look like when they first come to you? What kind of things are you looking at in their business? What kind of suggestions are you making? How does this program work kind of going forward for a startup that needs this sort of, structured program of B2B sales?
So, I like to practice what I preach. So in fact, I do only work with a very specific type of customer, and that is a B2B tech founder who is struggling with sales, that sells a high ticket service to enterprise customers and is looking for a way to create a repeatable, predictable revenue stream. And that's where it begins, right? So I'm very focused on those type of customers because that's where I can add the most value from my mix of sort of enterprise and startup experience. They ultimately share three problems. The first problem is they don't have a very focused offer or message, right? So typical situation, I don't know how often you have this, Timo, when you're standing in an event and somebody goes over to you and then, you inevitably pose the question, so what do you do? And then begins the 5-minute monologue of, all sorts of buzzwords and AI and distributed cloud and blah, 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 blah. And you're like,
that's half my week.
And then you're like, okay, thank you. Well, have a nice day. And you kind of walk off. But, that's where it begins, right? You have to have a focused offer and message so people understand what you're selling. That means a clear value proposition, a clear product offering, some clear messaging that talks about the problem rather than you. That's kind of the first pillar of the launch code and what I solve for. The second problem that a lot of companies at this stage of development have is they don't have a structured approach to client outreach. Or client acquisition. And what I do is I take them through this process of outbound selling, of partnerships, and inbound marketing, and using those three levers to combine this sort of structured sales approach, which ultimately means that they will reach out to people who are most likely to be interested in what they're selling and close more deals. And the third problem that I solve for with the launch code is, building a business is controlled chaos, right? I mean, you're constantly like doing all sorts of stuff, and there's shiny objects all the time coming in your field of vision. What I try to do is to narrow their focus on executing based on very clear targets, right? So what is it you want to achieve? What are the KPIs you're going to use to track your performance? How do you know what good looks like? How do you know if you're in the wrong track? Start making decisions based on data rather than gut feeling, and ultimately building a sales team around that is capable of scaling. So you as founder aren't sitting there at every single sales meeting. And so that sort of combination of focus and structure and execute based on targets is what I offer through the launch code, either through a personal mentoring program, or if somebody's interested in just getting the content, they can buy the entire course of 6 hours of videos, and they can get access to all the content themselves, and they can use me as a stopgap if they've come across some issues they want to discuss.
Okay, one more question to that before we kind of switch gears and talk a little bit more about corporate cultures that you've been involved with. Do you encourage startups to actually bring in salespeople when they're starting to gear up, or are you more of a fan of, the founders and the original team should be doing this originally before they start to bring in any salespeople so that they know it from the inside out? I'm
a big fan of the latter. So I think one of the big mistakes that founders make is they think they can delegate the sales responsibility, right? And that's fine, because effectively, an overwhelming majority of the founders even I work with are kind of tech-focused, product-driven founders. Sales and marketing isn't their comfort zone. They kind of think of it as voodoo. But the reality is that you cannot avoid the pain of sales if you want to, experience the gain of sales. And what I mean by that is you have to go through the process of reaching out to people, getting in front of them, understanding their problems, understanding the objections they raise with your service, working that back into your product development, working that back into your offering and your messaging. You just have to go through that process, and it takes time. Even if you're a very seasoned salesperson, it takes time. So you might as well do it as if you're a product focused person, because that's where you're going to understand what it is that you can actually ask your salespeople to bring on and to execute. Once you have that, that general understanding of the problem you solve, who you solve it for, and why you're better than the competition, that's when you can bring in external salespeople who are going to help you execute on that vision. And even then, it's not like, it's written in stone. It's going to evolve over time as you expand your business and you realize certain things are resonating with your target customers, certain things are not. But at least you're not setting them up for failure because you're telling them to kind of do the hard work and then, rather than doing it yourself.
I can definitely get on board with that. I wonder, and I just want to press just a little bit on this. I have seen quite a few founders where they are the typical, I just want to work in front of my computer. I've built something wonderful. I don't like talking to people all that much. And you can see it in their eyes as soon as you try and talk to them. They get this horrible feeling of, I know I should be doing this. This is a good thing that someone wants to talk to me, but I really don't want to be here. What do you tell those founders?
I tell them to accept the fact that they have to move beyond their comfort zone if they're going to be successful. But I also tell them that I don't think the expectation is for you to then turn into a completely different person. What it means is that you have to be comfortable with the fact that you're going to have to understand what your customer wants. And it's a good idea to get a co-founder who balances your skill set with, more kind of traditional sales and marketing skills. Any team that I've worked with that I think has really broken through has always been a combination of a product person and a sales and marketing person. Literally, it's that combination. And I think that that's what's going to lead most to success. Having said that, there are great examples of founders I've worked with who have evolved in their environment. So a German company that I work with, a company called Computomics out of Tübingen, they're in the agricultural technology space, a PhD founder, a true scientist in the truest form of the word, who has built a company in the last sort of, I guess, few years where they started scaling, that has been a meaningful player in this very niche area that they operate in. And I've seen in my own eyes how he has opened up and he's become a much stronger salesperson, a leader, not probably because that's something that he imagined he'd doing, but that's just what's required from the job, right? And so he's evolved in that sense. And so I think that that's where it's incumbent upon the founders to accept that selling is part of the problem, part of the solution. And I think, just going from my own personal experience. So, I've built my career in sales. I've closed $2 billion worth of B2B sales over the course of my career. So by all accounts, I'm a seasoned salesperson. Well, I didn't start out that way. I actually am the son of two academics. Both my parents were professors. I grew up in a house with 10,000 books on the shelves and with very, very small understanding of commercial activity or any interest in selling. In fact, selling was kind of something you didn't talk about because it was icky, right? So I came out of that environment and was lucky enough early on in my career to start working for somebody who explained to me that actually selling isn't about trying to convince somebody to buy something they don't need. You're actually solving an important problem for them. And I think that's such an important mindset shift, that you understand that your job as a salesperson / founder is to solve another person's problem. And let's be honest, who doesn't want their problem solved and who doesn't like to solve problems for others? I mean, that's the greatest thing. And so if you adjust your mindset to that, you'll find that the whole process becomes less foreign and much more smooth and actually very rewarding.
Two things I got out of that I think I just want to emphasize, which I think you're right on with, is first, an understanding and acceptance of what the life of a startup founder is going to be like. It is going to be a life where you are getting out of your comfort zone. You're doing things that you've never done before. And the second thing is that you're absolutely right. This is a skill. It's not just you are a salesperson or you're not a salesperson. Anybody can learn to sell if you put your mind to it, if you practice at it, if you get good training and get good help with it. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. Now, before we end, I wanted to get your experience on different corporate cultures, because you were, amongst many positions, a very high-ranking position at ProSieben, which all of my German listeners will know is one of the biggest media companies in Germany. And a lot of startups that I chat with, particularly when they hit around the Series A level, they're starting to look towards the United States. They're starting to look to wider markets. And what differences are you seeing in corporate B2B sales culture between Germany, Europe, and then the United States? Because they do business in very different ways. And how would you prepare a startup for taking that leap outside of Germany to the UK or to the US?
So this is one of those questions that unfortunately requires you to dive into some stereotypes, right? Like, what are German leaders like, and what are Americans like, and and what are the differences? And stereotypes are there for a reason, right? There are certain generally cultural comparisons that you have to make, and I can acknowledge that. So I was actually CEO for Central and Eastern Europe at ProSieben, which was an independent division with 5 TV channels, 1,000 employees, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. So it's pretty big sized, meaningful sized business. And I reported into the headquarters in Munich. And as an American-born executive, I did find it sometimes challenging to find my way around the German culture in Unterföhring outside of Munich, because as you would expect, the German culture was much more conservative. It was much more formal. It was much more structured than what you would have experienced, let's say, in the same situation in the United States. Having said that, as a German company looking to, let's say, enter the US, that presents a great opportunity. One of the things that that you have just to accept is that in the United States, the sales and marketing as a form of behavior is like breathing air. It's just such a natural part of the culture. So this idea that, well, I shouldn't be very, very, pushy because, they're not going to want me to be, so forthright in what I want. Actually, Americans love you when you just tell them what you want. I mean, it's really is it's an expectation, and this concept of like, well, we have to be very careful, and we have to, it just doesn't work. Actually, if you don't speak up, nobody's gonna recognize you. And I've got a great example of how this mindset has really shocked me just a few weeks ago. So I was found by a US based startup founder who was in the edtech space and had reached out to me through one of the workshops I did and wanted to have a chat. And I think he's I'm guessing him in his mid-20s, this young man. And I had this conversation with him, and, as you do, well, what do you do? And he's like, well, we got product market fit, and we're expanding, and we got all this stuff, and we're going to go into Europe. And I'm like, oh, really? That's fantastic. How long have you been around? It's been 9 months already, and we're growing. And what's your monthly recurring revenue? Well, we've hit $15,000 a month. And then I'm like thinking to myself, man, that's a pretty bold behavior for a company that's been around for 9 months and has hit 15,000 euros a month or dollars a month of revenue. Fast forward, I'm talking to a startup founder out of the Czech Republic, who, similar context, is saying, yeah, we're doing our best. We're kind of trying to break out. We had a lot of challenges. Oh, well, tell me about your business. Well, we've hit 200,000 euros monthly revenue now. We've been around for about 3 years. And it was almost like he was apologetic about the fact that he's this money. And so there's like this juxtapositioning of like the 25-year-old kid out of the States with 15,000 monthly revenue behaving like he's running Google. And then the guy out of the Czech Republic who is basically running a business that's 20-fold, who's behaving like somebody who is ashamed to be a founder, right? So it was such an interesting juxtapositioning or comparison of these mentalities. Long story short, I really encourage founders out of Germany to, as we say in the United States, take the bull by the horns and really go hard into the US if they want to make a change, or if they want to break in, because nobody's going to be offended if they're particularly pushy. And second of all, frankly, you're not going to get anybody's attention if you aren't.
I've talked to quite a few where they made their jump into the States, and then once they got a little bit of help with their sales approach in the States, which was along the lines of what you were saying, is just go and make the ask. Just make the ask faster than you would. Try and do it, 30 minutes faster than you normally would in a meeting. And people will appreciate that because then you're not wasting their time.
Yeah.
And then you can just get to the yes or the no, but they will appreciate you. And hey, maybe they even might recommend you, even if it's a no, because they know that you're going to do business well in the eyes of an American.
Two things I want to highlight from what you just said, because I've had this come back to me in multiple contexts. First of all, people in the States want to help. Like that, there's the culture of, hey, this isn't for me, but you should be speaking to my buddy here. Or, actually, I don't think this is the right fit for what we're doing, but you should definitely speak. So one of the things I hear from a lot of European founders is like, you just get a lot of people just helping because, just paying it forward, as they say, right? What comes around goes around. So you get that benefit. And that's a great cultural value in the US where people are just much more willing to help. It's the first thing. Second thing is, the one thing you have to be careful of, and I say this as an American, and I spent the first 22 years of my life in the United States and the subsequent 30 in Europe, so I kind of again see both sides of the story, is in the US, as much as people are very direct and very collaborative, there is a huge BS factor. And I won't say the words, right? But there's a huge BS factor of the people really overselling their qualifications and overselling the reality of what they can do. And it's a very difficult thing to judge. And it can lead you down the wrong path. So let me give you a specific example. So I worked with a health tech company out of Europe that was looking to launch into the US. And through some connection, they found their way to an American guy who basically convinced them that he had a direct connection to every single hospital in the US. And, he was going to bring them in with their technology everywhere. And through some miraculous course of events, got them to agree to a completely exclusive arrangement without any upfront guarantees, nothing, that effectively locked out this company from doing business with anybody but this guy. Well, time passed. I actually started working with them. So this predates my work with them. And I looked at the contract and I said, guys, what are you doing? What were you thinking? Like, how can you get into this environment? Well, he was really convincing, and, he really sold us on this thing. Fast forward a year later, the guy has done nothing. I was in a position to have a conversation with him by phone for 10 minutes. It took me about 2 minutes to realize he was full of crap. I mean, there was, no way that he had this type of access that he was selling. And he really pulled this company into a very difficult situation that ended up in sort of a legal battle. And so I think that's one of the challenges that you have to acknowledge is if you're going to go to the States, there's a big dose of bloated, projection that you have to cut your way through. And you have to be very careful that you don't fall for it because it could really hurt your business.
Yeah. And having somebody on your team or somebody you're associated with who has that good BS radar.
Exactly. Detector. Yeah.
Massively helpful. Which brings me to my last question, just a quick one. I'm interested. Under what circumstances would you tell a startup that they should hire somebody who has experience with the American market? Because I personally know a friend of mine who he was that guy where they hired him because he had a massive network in the States. He was American himself. And, he did very, very well for them. But he'd been living in Germany for a good long time. Is that something that is important, is bringing somebody in who knows the turf? Or do you think that founders can learn that stuff and it's really not that necessary as an expense?
I think it's a matter of timing. So I would not recommend that somebody, unless they really have extremely significant resources, but even then, just from a common sense standpoint, I wouldn't recommend starting a market by just like hiring somebody there and then letting them sort out the details. I believe very much in you have to test the market as a founder from a distance. Look, if anything's happened thanks to COVID, it's like the world has shrunk, right? So there's no expectation that you have to be everywhere physically. You can do a lot of calls, you can do a lot of discovery discussions, just the way that we're talking here, right, virtually. And so I think that I would encourage founders to test the waters and to get their first few customers at a distance. Once they've built traction, once they feel like there's a clear niche they can fill, that's when you can begin thinking about hiring some additional people. Even then, I'm not sure I would hire a senior person. I would hire more people on the ground who can support like customer success or maybe business development or marketing partnerships. And then once you've got that and you've got your foot in the ground, you've got a small team, that's when you hire a senior person. Because there's one thing that I think a lot of European founders are shocked about is the cost of a senior person in the US. I mean, it's 3 to 4 times what you'd expect, maybe if not 3 to 4, 2 to 3 times more expensive than in Europe. And so, especially on the sales side, right? If you're doing a business development thing. So it's a big commitment and look, it's a big risk. I mean, you're hiring somebody that doesn't come with your DNA. They might be a perfect person at presenting themselves, but actually they don't like heavy lifting, which of course we know in the startup world is a requirement. So I would do it in stages and that's what's going to lead to your highest chance of success.
Sound advice. Okay, we're going to get to our last segment here, which is our win, lose, or draw game. Zoltan, Are you ready to play?
I am.
All right, first one for you. Win, lose, or draw, every startup that does B2B sales taking on a startup coach or mentor for that specifically within the next 5 years.
I'd say win with a caveat that not every startup founder needs a sales coach, but everyone would benefit from one. There's a lot of tech founders who have that skill set and have that understanding, but maybe they haven't, practiced it enough in order to be successful in sales. Those people who really feel like they don't understand what sales and marketing is about, they're not comfortable with understanding what the process is and everything, really would benefit from somebody who shows them the way. At the end of the day, of course, execution is always on the back of the founder, right? So the best mentor in the world can't do it for you. They can point you in the right direction. So yes, but be prepared to ultimately do it yourself.
Next one, win, lose, or draw. Big corporates starting to take more risk and doing more deals with smaller startups.
I'm going to say draw on this one because it really depends on which corporates you're talking about. Whether more will take risks, I can't be for sure, but I think that as we progress and as technology becomes such an integral part of our day-to-day lives, the comfort level for testing and experimenting will be growing. But I also wouldn't mislead founders to think that all of a sudden big companies that have behaved a certain way for the last 100 years are going to suddenly do it differently. They might tip their toes in the water a little bit more easily, but they're still going to be demanding a lot of the risks avoidance that is fundamental to the DNA of a company.
Do you think it's desirable that they take on more risk and start working with more startups? Do you think that that would actually be a good thing, or it's not really their place?
I think it would be a huge benefit to companies to take more risk. Having worked in that environment for 20 years, I know that how difficult it is for anybody who is a little bit more innovative or is a little bit outside the box in their thinking to basically rise within that type of organizational environment. So yes, they would benefit significantly. The best way to do it, actually, I think a great model is that what Virgin does, Richard Branson's group of companies. Basically, any business they start as a separate independent entity. They have the resources of the back office for the corporation until they reach about 50 or 70 people, and then they're basically spun off into a different company and basically operate as an independent company. I think it's a really interesting model where you get the benefits of the big company and the corporate organization, but at the end of the day, you act like a small company within a large one.
Yeah, not an easy thing for them to change their DNA, but
no. But then again, Richard Branson isn't exactly a typical corporate leader either. So
no, certainly not. No, okay. All right. So our last one. I hope this one doesn't give you a big head, but win, lose, or draw, Zoltan Vardy turning the launch code into a book one day.
Yes, 100%. It's already on my to-do list and actively working on it. So I'm hoping 2024 will be the year I release my first book to the market. So
nice one.
Very committed to that.
Cool. Then that'll bring us to the end of our chat. Zoltan, thanks so much for sharing your wealth of experience and your significant perspective on different corporate cultures. We really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it as well, Timo. And if you'll allow me, I do have one special offer to your listeners if they're interested in taking advantage. So one of the things that I do when I start the launch code with my customers is to go through their value proposition, right? Which is basically a single sentence that explains what problem you solve for whom and why you're better than the competition. And I've created sort of a 5-step process to create a new value proposition. And what I want to offer is the opportunity to download a 30-minute free video with a worksheet that they can use to create their own value proposition. They just have to go to zoltanvardy.com/podcast. So zoltanvardy.com/podcast. They can download it and they can benefit from that. And if based on that they feel like it'd be worthwhile for us to have a conversation, I'm certainly open to that as well. And they can look for me on LinkedIn.
Yep, right. Sounds really good. And we will link to that in all of our show notes. So look for that link below. Thanks again to everyone for listening and watching, and we will catch you all again next week.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming by this week. The link that Zoltan just mentioned, you'll find in the show notes. Be sure to like, comment, and share wherever you're able. And we'll see you again next time in the ring. Take care, everyone.